Today, Dr. Pierre-Olivier Bonin will make a presentation on Does Community Activism Make Quebec Anglophones Happier? Based on his working paper on fostering the well-being of English-speaking Quebecers through community involvement. A statistical analysis of the relationship between activism and individual happiness. Pierre-Olivier, you may start your presentation.
Yes, hi. From political science, originally from University of Toronto. And so this presentation is based on the working paper that Ms. Ana Gomez has mentioned. And I'd like to point out first that it's based on survey data that I've collected as part of my doctoral dissertation. And so welcome, and I'm happy to be here and happy to see that many of you have chosen to attend this Zoom Lunch and Learn. It's my first time here, so I'll do the best I can for you. Here's how I'll proceed for this presentation. First, I'll give you an overview of the study of the OLMCs. It's based on the content of my working paper, so it follows the same order. I'll present the hypothesis. We'll do something new that was not obviously in the paper. It's a live poll, and then I'll show the results from my statistical analysis. We'll discuss the limitations, implications, and recommendations, and then we'll go through the Q&A period in which we will be able to discuss any question you have or any comment. So. The study of OLMCs, first of all, is official language minority communities for those who are not familiar with the acronym. And so there's a diversity of approaches in the field of study of OLMCs. You've got many people from different disciplines, so it's a very interdisciplinary field. And one of the foremost approaches, the most well-known approaches is the vitality studies, or what I call the vitality studies. It includes group vitality studies, subjective vitality, community vitality, many concepts by which scholars have analyzed let's say, the collective well-being of OLMCs. And so most of the time, what I've noticed is that these scholars and researchers have used aggregate indicators. And so here with the working paper, I'm using an individual level indicator, and it's kind of the main contribution of my study. So the research question of my working paper was the following: does being directly involved in the activities of organizations, groups, institutions, and networks in Quebec's English-speaking communities contribute to individual happiness? If so, to what extent? What does that mean in light of the issue of community vitality? So, the literature on participation is quite broad, and it goes over many themes. And in my field, participation is commonly framed as the following questions. You got scholars examining the determinants of electoral participation and how to increase it. You got others analyzing whether some electoral systems are favoring higher turnout rates than others. You got some examining if there are other forms of participations, and some others are looking at the factors that are conducive to non-electoral participation. So here for this study, I've chosen to take participation as the dependent variable or DV. So in other words, I'm trying to explain. Sorry, there's a typo here. The happiness is the dependent variable, and participation is the independent variable, meaning that I'm trying to explain happiness by participation, and to look at whether there's a relationship between both. So in the literature, I found several related concepts that go back to a few decades ago, so it's not a new concept. There was this concept of social interest by psychologist Adler, who defined it as concern with fostering the welfare of others. And he said it's a core component of psychological well-being. Recent studies have corroborated this notion, found evidence that college students with a higher degree of social interest have better life satisfaction. Another similar concept is that of generativity from Erickson. He defines it as the desire to care about something bigger than the self and to foster the welfare of future generations. And once again, there's recent evidence of a positive association with life satisfaction and psychological well-being. And so I thought, participation might be just basically a consequence of social interest or generativity, because you need to have some form of empathy in order to get involved with your community and make it an important part of your life. So here I looked into the literature again, and I found evidence that activism has many benefits. Among others, there was a study showing positive impacts among racialized immigrant women, and the authors talked about the notion of everyday activism. And similarly, other scholars, Clar and Gasser, distinguish between conventional and high-risk activism. So conventional and everyday activism would be similar constructs. And both studies have found evidence of a higher psychological well-being associated with everyday activism and conventional activism. And so the explanation underlying those constructs would be that people find a sense of meaningfulness, and in a way they're empowered when they get involved in their communities, and this contributes to their happiness. So the resulting hypothesis that I've constructed was that Anglo-Quebecers involved in community work and or volunteering are more likely to be happy than those who are not. And once again, finding meaning, and there's also this notion of intrinsic motivation as opposed to the research for the seeking of extrinsic goals. It makes sense with activism when you think about it. And so here I would like to ask you, before I present the results, to do this little exercise just for the fun of it. All right, so that sounds about right with the hypothesis I've constructed. Obviously, this is not this has no scientific value, this kind of live survey, because we got a sample that's much too low to be useful, but it's just interesting to look at this. And basically the audience here are, we can assume that you are mostly people who are interested and or involved in the communities of English-speaking Quebecers in a way or another. And we can see that a quite strong majority of you are happy or rather happy with your life in the province of Quebec. So let's go back to the PowerPoint right now, the presentation, and look at the results of my survey. So as you can see here, I've not explained, but it's already explained in the paper. But my sample in the study was constituted of about 300 individuals coming from 12 organizations and Facebook groups from the English-speaking communities in Quebec. And we can see that it's kind of an even distribution. You got about half of people who declared being rather happy or happy, and about half being rather unhappy or unhappy, and 15% undecided or neither. And so here we'll look at what happens when we distinguish between activists and what I'll say, what I've constructed, what we'll say is rank and file, or for lack of a better term. And so here in the sort of beige color, you got activists. And once again, a majority of them declare being happy or rather happy with their life in the province of Quebec. And when you look at rank and file individuals who are not quite involved in their communities, they are much less happy, as you can see. And so here, this is a little more complex to explain, but I've constructed regression models just to further test the statistical significance of the observed correlation, because here we can only observe sort of a correlation, and here we can be more confident that this is meaningful as a result. And so here I found that community activists are basically more likely to be happy across several different operationalization of regression models than rank and file individuals. In more simple terms, when we use predicted probabilities, then we can find that controlling for the other variables such as age, gender, region of residence, then activists are 6.9% less likely to be unhappy than rank and file, 8% less likely to be rather unhappy. Here, it's not worth quite mentioning. It's not statistically significant either. And they are 6% more likely to be rather happy and 10% more likely to be outright happy than rank and file members. And so here we're getting to the end of the presentation. I'd like to point out that there are limitations to my study, obviously. I have not looked further into the direction of causality, meaning, in other words, that it might be that instead activists tend to be more happy by nature, and it might from the start. So it might be that they were already more happy than rank and file, and then they got involved in their communities, which would have a lot of implications again with regard to the results. So that would be a path maybe for future research. And also, I have not distinguished between people who work for English-speaking organizations in Quebec and people who volunteer. So again, maybe some would be more satisfied with their lives. Maybe volunteers would be more satisfied with their lives. It's something we could further explore. And so this has implications also as when it comes to control over institutions. And there's literature on the matter. For instance, I found an interesting piece discussing the example of community learning centers. And it's Langevin and Lamar who said that they're basically hubs for participation and civic engagement, and they are promoting better health for community and stronger social fabric, etc. And so as a recommendation based only on the evidence I've found here in the study, we could conclude that based on this, governments should seek to maintain, if not increase, the number of opportunities for members of the English-speaking communities to participate in their communities and their institutions and their decision-making processes at large. And so it seems to make sense that policy has a direct impact on OLMC's vitality, and lots of studies corroborate the notion that volunteerism and implications has many benefits, be it either for informal economy, for building social capital, for consolidating trust between communities, for preventing social isolation, or simply for empowering individuals. And here, my study's main contribution would be that it shows that it's contributing to individual happiness. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Charles Taker is curious about the word activism as opposed to volunteering, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay, good question. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so activism, I take it in the broad sense, and I as opposed to volunteerism, for example, I think activism here means that it includes working for an organization as well. So community activism specifically, that's the sense in which I'm using the word in the study. So yes, I wanted to include as many people as possible. So both volunteers and people who work for an English-speaking organization. So there are dozens and dozens, as you probably already know, such organizations. But it could also be associations, networks, even online groups. So I've included all of those in the definition.
Okay. So Heather would like to know, what is the difference between conventional or everyday?
Oh, okay. So I haven't looked specifically in how both studies distinguish, or what could distinguish both concepts actually. But I think, you know, the reason I put those both together is that from what I've read, it's pretty similar. And so conventional activism, the authors distinguished it from high-risk activism. And by that, they meant we could just make up an example from recent news we've seen, events we've seen in Quebec politics in the previous years. We saw people climb a bridge to environmental activists climb a bridge to protest some decisions. I cannot even remember what it was, but you know, this would be a kind of high risk activism because it's something that sometimes could be construed as a civil disobedience, for instance, something that's borderline illegal. And whereas conventional activism or everyday activism would be something that's really not the same thing. It's completely legal. It's just, you know, getting involved in the activities of your community, engaging with their events, and you know, that's much less risky as a kind of activity. That's how I would put it. That's how I understand it, at least.
Okay. Christopher would like to, has a question, is activism only through formal channels like organizations? Does it include protesting, for example? And what about signing a petition?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so sorry, what was the, okay, I got the question here in the chat. Is activism only through formal channels like organizations? Yes, I include protesting. Yeah, that's the thing though. Protesting can lead or could be more high risk activism, but yeah, I mean, from what I've seen in the English speaking communities, there are indeed some forms of, I would say, online activism, which would include signing a petition. But most of the time, I think when you sign a petition, you've already engaged with your community in a way or another. You're already a member of a Facebook group, for instance, or another form of online community, and you've come across this petition from someone in your network, and you've decided that you're gonna take action. It's not a very high cost type of action, obviously, but you've decided to take action and sign this petition online to make a difference.
Hi, yes, I believe we lost. Hi, this is Anna Hung from QUESCREN. I believe we lost Anna Gomez, so I'll step in while she's lost in the cosmos somewhere online.
Signing a petition, maybe.
She's motivated. She's gone to sign up a petition. Okay, so I'm just looking at the questions we have. We have a comment and a question from C. Gosselin. She says, you briefly mentioned in one of your charts about rural versus urban activism. She'd like to know if you can elaborate a bit more on that. Does place where you live make a difference in happiness than in your activism, or is it the other way around? As a sociologist, she defines an activist as a change maker, while a volunteer is someone who helps, but without seeking some kind of societal wide change. So maybe you'd like to address the question.
Yes, good question. So it's Miss Cheryl Gosselin. Hi, I think I'm citing one of your works in the paper, actually. If I may go back to the slide, that'd be great. I think I'll share my my screen again. Okay.
Yeah, you able to do that?
Yeah.
Great.
Right here. Okay. So you can see this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, indeed, we got a difference between regions of residence, and we're seeing here, and it's quite interesting, indeed, that suburban residents are much less likely to be happy than urban. So here the reference category is urban residents. And so by comparison with urban residents, suburbans are less likely to be happy. This holds even when I include the control group of Franco-Ontarians. And it holds also in the partial proportional odds regression model here, as you can see. And interestingly, it's the opposite for rural residents who are, let's say, a little more likely to be happy than urban residents. And so by transitivity, you could say that they are more likely also to be happy than suburban residents. And this holds again, but you get a more nuanced portrait if you look at the partial proportional odds model, because you can see how it goes across all categories. You see that it's not a linear effect. I don't know if I know it may sound a little complex to those who are not familiar with regression models, but basically, yeah, I'll just leave it at that for the moment. I'll go back to what was the question. Okay, so there was a component on volunteer versus activists. Yeah, so yeah, I didn't make that kind of distinction in the paper, but that might be a way again to bring about more conceptual distinctions and refine the findings and the evidence. So yeah, thank you.
So there's a question from Mel Kerridge about how would you classify attending demonstrations?
Yes. So yes, I guess that would be in the context of my study. Again, that would be included as an instance of activism, not because per se I make a distinction about it, but because, as I explained before, if you attend a demonstration, then you are most likely already involved in your community, be it through an organizations, whether you follow, you're subscribed to a newsletter, or you're a member of an online group, or otherwise. That's how I would see it.
Okay. We have
Okay. Sorry.
Anna's back. He's back in the room. Off you go, Anna.
Okay. Did you look at opportunities for activism, thinking about the opportunities in urban versus rural, and how that would affect the happiness quotient?
Where is that question?
Yeah, the question is from Catherine Dima.
Okay, I'm just trying to find it. Was it in the chat?
Yes, it's right after Mel Kerridge. Did you look at opportunities for activism? Thinking about the opportunities in urban versus rural.
I'm not seeing this question, but yeah, if I look at opportunities for activism, making a difference between rural and urban, I think, once again, I don't want to repeat myself too much here. You know, I think this sounds a lot like previous questions to me. I think I've been clear on the matter. I don't make distinctions between workers or volunteers, nor volunteers and activists. I just use a broad definition of activists here, including both people who work and who volunteer, and I use a region of residence as sort of a control variable by which you can see the difference between different individuals, and I just show this. So maybe we can see. So yeah, next up I see a question about rates of happiness with engagement for Anglo-Quebecers and Franco-Ontarians from Mr. David Johnston. If I can go ahead, and I'll share my my screen so we can see. So here, yeah, so that's also an interesting question, an interesting result as well. First of all, you got to know that these survey data were collected back in 2017. That was during my field work for the doctoral dissertation. And so here the finding is quite striking, because Franco-Ontarians are 4.5 times more likely than Anglo-Quebecers to declare being happy with their life in their province. So yeah, quite striking result. But you gotta again take yourself back to the context of 2017, and that was before Doug Ford's election, if you recall. And I would think that if I were to conduct a new survey right now in 2020, then Franco-Ontarians would perhaps be less happy because of all the decisions that have been made, and because of how the project was jeopardized and then put back on track, and how the position of the Commissioner for French Language Services was initially canceled and then put back in and merged into the Ombudsman organization of the Ontario government. And I don't know if I would be to speculate. I don't know how it would be for the Anglo-Quebecers right now. With once the CAC has been elected, I don't know if maybe they would be slightly happier, because there's been kind of actions taken, such as the Secretariat, who has made taken actions to foster the well-being of the English-speaking communities. So yeah, David Johnson's question was the difference. Well, obviously these are two quite different communities, Franco-Ontarians and Anglo-Quebecers. But you could say they are also both official language minority communities, so they are alike in that sense, and it makes for an interesting contrast, because these are neighboring provinces too. So yeah.
Okay, so now
it answers it.
Yeah, so now we have a question from Lorraine. How do you think the government could increase opportunities for English speakers to interact with communities?
Okay, yeah. So basically, I believe you gotta increase. I would think it goes through reconducting funding, or renew the funding, or increase the funding to organizations. Make sure organizations, networks, associations make commitments to themselves to foster an increase in the number of opportunities for participation. Organize more events, perhaps, to provide people with opportunities with contact and social interaction. I think that's how I would see it. Yeah.
Lorraine has a comment and a question. She's seeing in the comments a lot of reactions to the words activism and activist. People are suggesting words with similar meaning, like involved in their community, community service, and engagement. Can you please explain why you chose the word activism, and do you think another of these terms might be useful for future research?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I get the question, and I get maybe the unease with the term I used. I believe there might be a connotation associated with the word activist, and maybe people by instinct they think about more of a high risk type of behavior when they think of activists. But so yeah, the reason I chose this is specifically to include people who were both working and volunteering for these organizations. I think I was looking for, I couldn't find a word for a noun for to designate those people. So activists, but how would you call people involved in their communities? You cannot say, there's not a noun like involvists or engagists. So I chose activist, community activists. Let's say, I think that way, if you say community activists, then you might be able to avoid the connotation of what you could imagine is a protester or yeah, a high risk activist. I don't know if it makes sense. I hope, hopefully.
Thanks. I'm just I'm struck by all the comments people are making. It would be interesting if people in the chat could come up with other nouns for like activist, engaged person. You know, I don't have a suggestion. Nothing comes to mind.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a struggle. I think also, to be frank, I think I'm originally a francophone, and so in French, activist, it doesn't really have the same connotation as in English, I believe. So I might have originally thought of using this word, and then realized along the way that it's not really how it sounds or how it resonates in English. I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm open to suggestions, as Lorraine pointed out.
Okay. Gary would like you to comment on the recent issue of the Quebec government trying to eliminate English school board elections and the messaging that this has created. English public schools have a long history of the Anglophone community being very involved in many aspects of the English public school governance and engagement, far greater than the Francophone public school system.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Let me just read once again. Yes, so I don't have the numbers about this, but I would assume maybe Mr. Jerry is right, but I would assume, or maybe the decision makers might have assumed that public engagement with the school boards was quite low, because indeed on the francophone side it's quite low, so it doesn't justify, you could argue it's not justified to keep those going. But I would agree that in a minority context, things might be different, or school boards might be more important, or might play a more important role for participation than on the francophone side. That's what I would say. Yeah, I think it's always good to have more data on the question before you make decisions. But yeah, it's a fair question.
Okay, we have a question from Sheila Lawson. It would be interesting to have asked people you interview how they would describe their involvement. I am sure many would have called themselves activists in the perspective of what they are involved with. Mm-hmm. I consider myself a volunteer in many aspects of my life, engaged in relation to promoting or advocacy as an activist, as a raging granny on issues that concern us, that we try to take to the public and decision makers.
Yes. Okay. So how? Yeah, I think you're correct. Probably people I interviewed, because indeed I didn't mention this, but I interviewed people prior to conducting the survey. But yeah, I agree that a lot of people might not call themselves activists. But on the other hand, when you're a researcher and you're conducting research, you're not supposed to simply take the words of your not, I wouldn't say your subjects, but of the people you enter in contact with. You're not just taking their words for granted, and you're not using their words as your conceptual tools. You gotta make your own reflection, and you gotta try to use your own concepts if you think it makes sense. So I would suggest, again, maybe you could see yourself as a community activist, or how you'd say, you're a community advocate, maybe. Yeah, that would make sense to me. Yeah, that as Lorraine is pointing out, engaged is the verb, but what would be the noun? Person engaged in community. It's yeah, it's just a way. It's also a way to make it shorter, to make it more simple and easy to understand. Mr. Christopher Bourne is suggesting that there might be something within the concept of active citizenship. So we could talk maybe of active citizens, but then one of the problems I would see just off the top of my head would be that there's already this notion of active people and inactive. I don't know if it's the same in English, but it relates to whether you're working or not. And so you have active people who are on the labor market, and other people who are not. I love the raging grannies. I haven't heard of that term either. I wouldn't dare use it, but it's quite funny indeed.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you answered the question, Pierre-Olivier. Did you find that Franco-Ontarians or Franco-Quebecers volunteer as much as Anglo-Quebecers?
Yes. So I was not, quite frankly, I was not in a position to assess the extent or the magnitude to which people are volunteering or not. Maybe you could look at in terms of the number of organizations. I'm not sure, what would be the proper indicators to measure the degree of engagement or degree of volunteerism within both communities. I know for a fact that there are dozens of organizations on both sides, but then you would have to sort of relate it to proportions, and you have to keep in mind that the English-speaking communities in Quebec are much bigger in terms of demographics than Franco-Ontarians, roughly twice as big. And so you could say that you need to expect, or for it to be equal, you have to have twice the number as on the Franco-Ontarian side.
Okay. We have a comment here. These concepts are found in the scholarly literature, but are not always meaningful in real life. Mm-hmm. What a great research project for you to conduct as a follow-up, to do interviews with Anglos about how they define their engagement activities. So that could be.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a great idea, and I'm open to suggestions and how I could undertake such a follow-up project. Yeah. Thank you.
1 second, because we missed a question by. I'm sorry. Could Mel Carriage, could you please post your question again? I'm sorry, I must have missed it. And
what? Okay.
We can certainly, in the meantime, we can address the question by Kimberly. Do you have any comments on children and community activism? And if so, what recommendations would you make to parents and teachers? That's from Kimberly.
Yes. Okay. Oh my God. I haven't done much with regards, or I haven't studied children and teaching and education, and you know, I really I don't think I'm in a position to provide any recommendation in that matter. So I'm sorry. Maybe I feel there's a question that was skipped. Yeah, so I went back to it and I think I've found it. And I think it's interesting. So, isn't the long-term goal of the government to promote French as a language for engaging with the community? It would be interesting to look at Anglo-Quebecers who are fluent in French and their community engagement / happiness. I know I'm being the devil's advocate. I mean, yeah, this is a pretty interesting observation. I would say it depends on which government you're talking about. If it's the government of if it's the Quebec government, then of course yes, they are interested in promoting the French language. But I would say that it's not it's a kind of a false dilemma, because you should be able to both promote French and to promote community vitality of your linguistic minority, because now we got evidence that it promotes happiness, or it fosters their happiness, or you could always conduct more studies to make sure that it does, and that the evidence is solid enough. But and yeah, Anglo-Quebecers who are fluent in French and their community engagement, probably I would expect that those who are more bilingual or tend to be more happy in with their life in the province of Quebec.
Yes. Okay. So we have time for about maybe one more question, and just a second. And Kimberly is also asking, what was the age frame you were working with?
The age frame. So I had a variety of individuals ranging from, I had no children because of ethical concerns, and generally it's easier to conduct those surveys if you do it with adults only. So I have individuals ranging from 18 all the way through 70 plus, and I could show you a distribution of the just descriptive statistics about this. But yeah, I got a really quite evenly distributed. There's a variety of people from all ages in my sample.
Okay, and the very last question or comment is, thank you for this. People who are bilingual are happier in Quebec. What is something you looked at? What is something you look at in your study? Or was this something that you look at in your study?
Probably was this something you looked at?
Yes.
No, actually, I didn't look at this, but I do have data. I do have a variable on the degree, sort of a self-assessed degree of bilingualism from my respondents. So I could look at it and maybe construct a new hypothesis and test the hypothesis to see if bilingual people are more happy in Quebec. That's a good suggestion. Yeah.
Okay. So with this, we have come to the end of our session. We thank you all for attending, and we wish you all a very happy and sunny afternoon.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here and for listening.